Does the person you care for have explosive reactions whenever you ask them to do something? When you tell them to make their bed, clean up the kitchen, or take out the trash? Come with me and we'll talk about 3 questions that you can ask that will help you to understand why they might react so strongly. When I'm reflecting on an explosive outburst that I've experienced with someone, I always like to ask myself these 3 questions. We'll call these our behavioral checklist, and they're the 3 questions that you should ask yourself before you start trying to come up with strategies. You might have heard me call these the ABCs of behavior. So the first one is, what happened before and after the behavior? Next, what were the sensory needs that were or were not being met before and after the behavior? And then last, how safe or unsafe do you think the person was feeling in those moments? So what I want to do now is I want to describe a case to you and then tell you a story about a time where I experienced an explosive reaction when someone was asked to take out the trash. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get some practice asking ourselves these 3 questions to try and come up with some strategies together. Imagine we're talking about a young teen, say 14 years old, has a diagnosis of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Able to express himself with his words, is a bright kid, loves hockey, loves to play video games, goes to school regularly but has been sent home for fighting in the past. This teen grew up moving from foster home to foster home, and previous reports tell us that he has an explosive temper and has behaved aggressively towards others in the past. When this would happen, his previous caregivers would sometimes just walk out of the room for their safety. Other times they would have to call for help. Sometimes they would have to physically restrain the teen and lock them in their bedroom until they calmed down. Now let's imagine in this story that he's in a new foster home and they're just getting to know each other. The teen is playing video games. Their foster parent comes into the room and tells them to take out the trash. Out of nowhere, the teen has an explosive reaction, including swearing, spitting, yelling, and stomping his feet. The foster parent has heard of this teen's history and doesn't want it to get any more explosive, not to the point of needing to restrain them. So they turn and walk out of the room, leaving him be. Sounds unpleasant, doesn't it? If I was this caregiver, maybe I would feel like I need to show the teen that I mean business, that I mean what I say. On the other hand, I might be worried that if I push too hard, those behaviors could get even worse. So, even though it's uncomfortable, we have to be able to reflect on what's just happened. We need to be able to ask ourselves those 3 questions. What happened before and after? What are the sensory needs that were or weren't being met? And how safe or unsafe was the teen feeling in that moment? So, what we're going to do is we're going to dig through that information, we're going to answer those 3 questions, and we're going to try and come up with some strategies. So if we think about what was happening before and after, it goes something like this. The teen was playing video games, and the caregiver came into the room and said, "Take out the trash." That's what was happening before. Then the teen started to have an explosive outburst. That's the behavior. And what happened after was that the caregiver just left the room. Now, what I want to talk about right now is one really easy way that you can change what was happening before. It's something called choose your moment. So when you reflect on those times where you've had to ask someone to do something that they didn't do, really ask yourself, could you have chosen a better moment? So if we think about our story, maybe instead of asking while the teen is playing video games, maybe we ask before he starts. Or maybe if the teen is already playing video games, but we know that he stops to go to hockey, then we ask him as he's out the door to take it as he goes. Okay, think about it. Choose your moment. Something to consider when we think about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and some other neurodisabilities is that their brain works differently. This means that the areas of their brain responsible for something called executive functioning work differently too. Executive functioning is basically how the brain plans and executes a sequence of steps to reach a goal, which means that when we tell this teen to take out the trash, it is really hard for him to plan it out and do it, even though it feels like it's only a few steps. But is it only a few steps? Think about it. I need to go to the trash can, open the trash can, put down the lid, pick up the bag, tie the bag, and we're not even halfway done yet. I still have to pick up the bag, take it to the dumpster, open the dumpster, put the bag in, close the dumpster, go to the door, go inside, etc., etc., etc. Now that we've seen how complicated something like taking out the trash can be, I want you to think of another strategy that we can use to try and change how things were before the explosive behavior can happen. I want you to think about making it easier. So, what do I mean by that? Instead of having them have to come all the way out to the trash bin and toss it in there, maybe they can just get it to the front door and someone else can take care of the rest. Or if you're really thinking ahead, maybe you could tie the bag up before they get there so that when they get there, they don't have to tie it, they just grab it and go. Get creative. Lean into the strengths that the person has and then build up towards being able to do the whole thing later. Next, let's talk about sensory needs. What kinds of sensory needs were or were not being met when the teen is playing video games? The teen is probably meeting some of their visual, auditory, and maybe tactile needs, right? There's lots to see, lots to hear, and playing with the controller might meet those touch needs. But think about it, sometimes they might get so invested in a video game that they don't feel what their body is telling them. They might be hungry or thirsty, these are interoceptive needs, and not even realize it until they stop playing. So imagine in this scenario where this person hasn't eaten or drank water in a few hours and we interrupt the game. Suddenly that feeling hits. Think about it. How do you feel when you are hungry? How would you feel if you were hungry and you're being asked to stop doing something you like to do something you don't like? Now this might sound overly simple, but by planning ahead and bringing something to eat or drink while the teen is playing video games, we can make sure that we're meeting those interoceptive needs that he might not even be aware of and possibly reduce some of that irritability when we ask him to stop playing and do something he doesn't want to do. Now for our third question, safety. Was the teen feeling safe or unsafe in those moments? That's the question that we usually ask. And it's easy to focus on the teen, but this time I also want to focus on what the caregiver was feeling. If I was consulting with a caregiver and they were talking to me about these explosive reactions, I would tell them to do the following things when they start to feel those explosive reactions starting. First, take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, uncross your arms, open your hands, and try to speak calmly. You might say something like, "I can tell you're upset. I'm here with you." You might do this standing or sitting next to the teen, but remember, in our story, in the past, the teen has shown that he sometimes will behave aggressively when he feels threatened. Now, it might not seem like we're threatening him, but if the teen feels threatened, he may behave aggressively just to protect himself. We have to remain aware of that. In some cases, it might be safer to give some distance, just for everybody's safety. Remember, everybody's different, so you're going to have to try and figure out what does that person need when they're going through those tense moments. Now, I'm not suggesting that this caregiver just let the teen get away from every single responsibility or task. Living with someone and sharing space comes with reasonable expectations of contributing to the family unit. So if this story speaks to you, I want you to reflect on those times in the past where these explosive outbursts have happened. Whether it's taking out the trash, making the bed, or cleaning up, I want you to try to come up with a plan ahead of time so that you can reduce their severity. Take a few minutes before you place a demand to think of ways that you can make that task easier. Pick your moment. Be mindful of the sensory needs that you can help the person meet before you place the demand, and try to stay aware of how your behavior affects how safe or unsafe someone can feel in those moments. We're going to wrap up this first episode here. Today we talked about how I think about supporting someone who has explosive outbursts, take out the trash, but stay tuned for the next video in the series where we'll take these 3 questions and tackle another complex case together. Until then, remember to ask yourself those 3 questions. What happened before and after the behavior? What sensory needs are or aren't being met? And how can you make the person feel safer in those tense moments? How can you behave differently to help them feel safer? See you next time.